Hey guys, This Blessed House by Jhumpa Lahiri. Read by me, Jordan Barclay, because I want to. Alright, let's dive in. They discovered the first one in a cupboard above the stove, beside an unopened bottle of malt vinegar. Guess what I found? Twinkle walked into the living room, lined from end to end with taped up packing boxes, waving the vinegar in one hand and the white porcelain effigy of Christ, roughly the same size as the vinegar bottle, in the other. Sanjeev looked up. He was kneeling on the floor, marking, with ripped bits of a post-it, patches on the baseboard that needed to be retouched with paint. Throw it away. Which? Both. But I can cook something with the vinegar. It's brand new. You've never cooked anything with vinegar. I'll look something up, in one of those books we got for our wedding. Sanjeev turned back to the baseboard, to replace a post-it scrap that had fallen on the floor. Check the expiration, and at the very least get rid of that idiotic statue. But it could be worth something. Who knows? She turned it upside down, then stroked with her index finger the minuscule frozen folds of its robes. It's pretty. We're not Christian, Sanjeev said. Lately he had begun noticing the need to state the obvious to Twinkle. The day before he had to tell her that if she dragged her end of the bureau instead of lifting it, the parquet floor would scratch. She shrugged. No, we're not Christian. We're good little Hindus. She planted a kiss on top of Christ's head, then placed the statue on top of the fireplace mantel, which needed, Sanji observed, to be dusted. By the end of the week, the mantel had still not been dusted. It had, however, come to serve as the display shelf for a sizable collection of Christian paraphernalia. There was a 3D postcard of St. Francis done in 4 colors, which Twinkle had found taped into the back of the medicine cabinet, and a wooden cross keychain, which Sanjeev had stepped on with bare feet as he was installing extra shelving in Twinkle's study. There was a framed paint by number on the tree Wiseman, against a black velvet background, tucked in the linen closet. There was also a tile trivet depicting a blonde, unbearded Jesus, delivering a sermon on a mountaintop, left in one of the drawers of the built-in china cabinet in the dining room. Do you think the previous owners were born-agains? Asked Twinkle, making room the next day for a small plastic snow-filled dome containing a miniature nativity scene, found behind the pipes of the kitchen sink. Sanjeev was organizing his engineering texts from MIT in alphabetical order on a bookshelf, though it had been several years since he had needed to consult any of them. After graduating, he moved from Boston to Connecticut to work for a firm near Hartford, and he had recently learned that he was being considered for the position of vice president. At 33, he had a secretary of his own, and a dozen people working under his supervision who gladly supplied him with any information he needed. Still, the presence of his college books in the room reminded him of a time in his life he recalled with fondness, when he would walk each evening across the Mass Avenue Bridge to order Mughlai chicken with spinach from his favorite Indian restaurant on the other side of the Charles, and return to his dorm to write out clean copies of his problem sets. Or perhaps it's an attempt to convert people, Twinkle mused. Clearly the scheme had succeeded in your case. She disregarded him, shaking the little plastic dome so that the snow swirled over the manger. He studied the items on the mantel. It puzzled him that each was in its own way so silly. Clearly they lacked a sense of sacredness. He was further puzzled that Twinkle, who normally displayed good taste, was so charmed. These objects meant something to Twinkle, but they meant nothing to him. They irritated him. We should call the realtor. Tell him there's all this nonsense left behind. Tell him to throw it away. Oh, Sanj, Twinkle groaned. Please. I would feel terrible throwing them away. Obviously they were important to the people who used to live here. It would feel, I don't know, sacrilegious or something. If they're so precious, then why are they hidden all over the house? Why didn't they take them with them? There must be others, Twinkle said. Her eyes roamed to the bare off-white walls of the room, as if there were other things concealed behind the plaster. What else do you think we'll find? But as they unpacked their boxes and hung up their winter clothes and the silk paintings of elephant processions bought on their honeymoon in Jaipur, Twinkle, much to her dismay, could not find a thing. Nearly a week had passed before they discovered, one Saturday afternoon, a larger-than-life-sized watercolor poster of Christ, weeping translucent tears the size of peanut shells and sporting a crown of thorns, rolled up behind a radiator in the guest bedroom. Sanjeev had mistaken it for a window shade. "Oh, we simply must put it up. It's too spectacular." Twinkle lit a cigarette and began to smoke it with relish, waving it around Sanjeev's head as if it were a conductor's baton at Mahler's Fifth Symphony roared from the stereo downstairs. "Now, look. I will tolerate, for now, your little biblical mangery in the living room. But I refuse to have this," he said, flicking at one of the painted peanut tears. "Displayed in our home." Twinkle stared at him, placidly exhaling, the smoke emerging in two thin blue streams from her nostrils. She rolled up the poster slowly, securing it with one of the elastic bands she always wore around her wrist for tying back her thick, unruly hair, streaked here and there with henna. "I'm going to put it in my study," she informed him. "That way you don't have to look at it." "What about the housewarming? They'll want to see all the rooms. I've invited people from the office." She rolled her eyes. Sanjeev noted that the symphony, now in its third movement, had reached a crescendo, for it pulsed with the telltale clashing of the cymbals. "I'll put it behind the door," she offered. "That way, when they peek in, they won't see. Happy?" He stood watching her as she left the room. With her poster and her cigarette, a few ashes had fallen to the floor where she'd been standing. He bent down, pinched them between his fingers, and deposited them in his cupped palm. The tender fourth movement, the adagietto, began. During breakfast, Sanjeev had read in the liner notes that Mahler had proposed to his wife by sending her the manuscript of this portion of the score. Although there were elements of tragedy and struggle in the Fifth Symphony, he had read it was principally music of love and happiness. He heard the toilet flush. "By the way," Twinkle hollered, "if you want to impress people, I wouldn't play this music. It's putting me to sleep." Sanjeev went to the bathroom to throw away the ashes. The cigarette butt still bobbed in the toilet bowl, but the tank was refilling, so he had to wait a moment before he could flush it again. In the mirror of the medicine cabinet, he inspected his long eyelashes. Like a girl's, Twinkle liked to tease. Though he was of average build, his cheeks had a plumpness to them. This, along with the eyelashes, detracted, he feared, from what he hoped was a distinguished profile. He was of average height as well, and had wished ever since he had stopped growing that he were just 1 inch taller. For this reason, it irritated him when Twinkle insisted on wearing high heels, as she had done the other night when they ate dinner in Manhattan. This was the first weekend they'd moved into the house. By then, the mantel had already filled up considerably, and they had bickered about it in the car on the way down. But then Twinkle had drunk 4 glasses of whiskey in a nameless bar in Alphabet City, and forgot all about it. She dragged him to a tiny bookshop on St. Mark's Place, where she browsed for nearly an hour, and when they left, she insisted that they dance a tango on the sidewalk in front of strangers. Afterward, she tottered on his arm, rising faintly over his line of vision, in a pair of suede 3-inch leopard print pumps, In this manner, they walked the endless blocks back to a garage on Washington Square. For Sanjeev had heard far too many stories about the terrible things that happened to cars in Manhattan. "But I do nothing all day except sit at my desk," she fretted when they were driving home. After he had mentioned that her shoes looked uncomfortable and suggested that perhaps she should not wear them, "I can't exactly wear heels when I'm typing." Though he abandoned the argument, he knew for a fact that she didn't spend all day at her desk. Just that afternoon, when he got back from her run, he found her inexplicably in bed, reading. When he asked why she was in bed in the middle of the day, she told him she was bored. He had wanted to say to her then, "You could unpack some boxes. You could sweep the attic. You could retouch the paint on the bathroom windowsill. And after you do it, you could warn me so that I don't put my watch on it." They didn't bother her, these scattered, unsettled matters. She seemed content with whatever clothes she found at the front of the closet, with whatever magazine was lying around, with whatever song was on the radio. Content, yet curious. And now all of her curiosity centered around discovering the next treasure. A few days later, when Sanjeev returned from the office, he found Twinkle on the telephone, smoking and talking to one of her girlfriends in California, even though it was before 5 o'clock and the long-distance rates were at their peak. "Highly devout people," she was saying, pausing every now and then to exhale. "Every day is like a treasure hunt. I'm serious. This you won't believe. The switch plates in the bedrooms were decorated with scenes from the Bible. You know, Noah's Ark and all that. 3 bedrooms, but one is my study. Sanjeev went to the hardware store right away and replaced them. Can you imagine? He replaced every single one." Now it was the friend's turn to talk. Twinkle nodded, slouched on the floor in front of the fridge, wearing black stirrup pants and a yellow Chanel sweater, groping for a lighter. Sanjeev could smell something aromatic on the stove, and he picked his way carefully across the extra-long phone cord tangled on the Mexican terracotta tiles. He opened the lid of a pot with some sort of reddish-brown sauce dripping over the sides, boiling furiously. "It's a stew made with fish. I put the vinegar in it," she said to him, interrupting her friend, crossing her fingers. "Sorry, you were saying?" She was like that, excited and delighted by little things, crossing her fingers before any remotely unpredictable event, like tasting a new flavor of ice cream or dropping a letter in a mailbox. It was a quality he did not understand. It made him feel stupid, as if the world contained hidden wonders he could not anticipate or see. He looked at her face, which, occurred to him, had not grown out of its girlhood. The eyes untroubled, the pleasing features unfirm, as if they still had to settle into some sort of permanent expression. Nicknamed after a nursery rhyme, she had yet to shed a childhood endearment. Now, in the second month of their marriage, certain things nettled him. The way she sometimes spat a little when she spoke, or left her undergarments after removing them at night at the foot of their bed rather than deposting them in the laundry hamper. They had met only 4 months before. Her parents, who lived in California, and his, who lived in Calcutta, were old friends, and across continents they had arranged the occasion at which Twinkle and Sanjeev were introduced, a 16th birthday party for a daughter in their circle, when Sanjeev was in Palo Alto on business. At the restaurant, they were seated side by side at a round table with a revolting platter of spare ribs and egg rolls and chicken wings, which, they concurred, all tasted the same. They had concurred too on their adolescent but still persistent fondness of Roadhouse novels, and their dislike for the sitar. And later Twinkle confessed that she was charmed by the way Sanjeev had dutifully refilled her teacup during their conversation. And so the phone calls began, and grew longer, and then the visits. First he to Stanford, then she to Connecticut, after which Sanjeev would save in an ashtray left on the balcony the crushed cigarettes she had smoked during the weekend. Saved them, that is, until the next time she came to visit him. And then he vacuumed the apartment, washed the sheets, even dusted the plant leaves in her honor. She was 27 and recently abandoned. He had gathered, by an American who had tried and failed to be an actor. Sanjeev was lonely, with an excessively generous income for a single man, and had never been in love. At the urging of their matchmakers, they married in India, amid hundreds of well-wishers whom he barely remembered from his childhood, in incessant August rains, under a red and orange tent strung with Christmas tree lights on Mandeville Road. "Did you sweep the attic?" he asked Twinkle later as she was folding paper napkins and wedging them by their plates. The attic was the only part of the house they had not yet given an initial cleaning. "Not yet. I will. I promise. I hope this tastes good," she said, planting the streaming pot on top of the Jesus trivet. There was a loaf of Italian bread in a little basket, and iceberg lettuce and grated carrots tossed with bottled dressing and croutons, and glasses of red wine. She was not terribly ambitious in the kitchen. She bought pre-roasted chickens from the supermarket and served them with potato salad, prepared who knows when, sold in little plastic containers. Indian food, she complained, was a bother. She detested chopping garlic and peeling ginger, and could not operate a blender, and so it was Sanjeev who, on weekends, seasoned mustard oil with cinnamon sticks and cloves in order to produce a proper curry. He had to admit, though, that whatever it was that she had cooked today, it was unusually tasty, attractive even, with bright white cubes of fish, and flecks of parsley, and fresh tomatoes gleaming in the dark brown-red broth. "How did you make it?" "I made it up." "What did you do?" "I just put things into the pot and added the malt vinegar at the end." "How much vinegar?" She shrugged, ripping off some bread and plunging it into her bowl. "What do you mean you don't know? You should write it down. What if you need to make it again, for a party or something?" "I'll remember," she said. She covered the bread basket with a dish towel that had, he suddenly noticed, the 10 Commandments printed on it. She flashed him a smile, giving his knee a little squeeze under the table. "Face it, this house is blessed." The housewarming party was scheduled for the last Saturday in October, and they had invited about 30 people. All were Sanjeev's acquaintances, people from the office, and a number of Indian couples in the Connecticut area, many of whom he barely knew, but who had regularly invited him, in his bachelor days, to supper on Sundays. He often wondered why they included him in their circle. He had little in common with any of them, but he always attended their gatherings, to eat spiced chickpeas and shrimp cutlets, and gossip and discuss politics, for he seldom had other plans. So far, no one had met Twinkle. Back when they were still dating, Sanjeev didn't want to waste their brief weekends together with people he associated with himself with being alone. Other than Sanjeev and an ex-boyfriend who she believed worked in a pottery studio in Brookfield, she knew no one in the state of Connecticut. She was completing her master's thesis at Stanford, a study of an Irish poet whom Sanjeev had never heard of. Sanjeev had found the house on his own before leaving for the wedding. For a good price, in a neighborhood with a fine school system, he was impressed by the elegant curved staircase with its wrought iron banister, and the dark wooden wainscoting, and the solarium overlooking rhododendron bushes, and the solid brass 22, which also happened to be the date of his birth, nailed impressively to a vaguely Tudor facade. There were 2 working fireplaces, a 2-car garage, and an attic suitable for converting into extra bedrooms if, the realtor mentioned, the need should arise. By then, Sanjeev had already made up his mind, was determined that he and Twinkle should live there together, forever. And so he had not bothered to notice the switch plates covered with biblical stickers, or the transparent decal of the Virgin on the half-shell, as Twinkle liked to call it, adhered to the window in the master bedroom. When, after moving in, he tried to scrape it off, He scratched the glass. The weekend before the party, they were raking the lawn when he heard Twinkle shriek. He ran to her, clutching his rake, worried that she had discovered a dead animal, or a snake. A brisk October breeze stung the tops of his ear as his sneakers crunched over brown and yellow leaves. When he reached her, she had collapsed on the grass, dissolved in nearly silent laughter. Behind an overgrown forsythia bush was a plaster Virgin Mary as tall as their waists, with a blue painted hood draped over her head in the manner of an Indian bride. Twinkle grabbed the hem of her t-shirt and began wiping away the dirt staining the statue's brow. "I suppose you want to put her by the foot of our bed," Sanjeev said. She looked at him, astonished. Her belly was exposed, and he saw that there were goosebumps around her navel. "What do you think? Of course we can't put this in our bedroom." "We can't?" "No, silly Sanj. This is meant for outside. For the lawn." "Oh, God, no, Twinkle, no." "But we must. It would be bad luck not to." "All the neighbors will see. They'll think we're insane." "Why? For having a statue of the Virgin Mary on our lawn? Every other person in this neighborhood has a statue of Mary on the lawn. We'll fit right in." "We're not Christian." "So you keep reminding me." She spat onto the tip of her finger and started to rub intently at a particularly stubborn stain on Mary's chin. "Do you think this is dirt or some kind of fungus?" He was getting nowhere with her. With this woman whom he had known for only 4 months and whom he had married. This woman with whom he had now shared his life. He thought with a flicker of regret of the snapshots his mother used to send him from Calcutta. Of prospective brides who could sing and sew and season lentils without consulting a cookbook. Sanjeev had considered these women, had even ranked them in order of preference. But then he had met Twinkle. "Twinkle, I can't have people I work with see the statue on my lawn." "They can't fire you for being a believer. It would be discrimination." "That's not the point." "Why does it matter to you so much what other people think?" "Twinkle, please." He was tired. He let his weight rest against his rake as she began dragging the statue toward an oval bed of myrtle, beside the lamppost that flanked the brick pathway. "Look, Sanj, she's so lovely." He returned to his pile of leaves and began to deposit them by handfuls into a plastic garbage bag. Over his head, the blue sky was cloudless. One tree on the lawn was still full of leaves, red and orange, like the tent in which he had married Twinkle. He did not know if he loved her. He said he did when she had asked him first, one afternoon in Palo Alto, as they sat side by side in a darkened, nearly empty movie theater. Before the film, one of her favorites, something in German that he found extremely depressing. She had pressed the tip of her nose to his so that he could feel the flutter of her mascara-coated eyelashes. That afternoon he had replied, yes, he loved her, and she was delighted, and fed him a piece of popcorn, letting her finger linger an instant between his lips, as if it were his reward for coming up with the right answer. Though she did not say it herself, he assumed then that she loved him too. But now he was no longer sure. In truth, Sanjeev did not know what love was. Only what he thought it was not. It was not, he had decided, returning to an empty carpeted condominium each night, and using only the top fork in his cutlery drawer, and turning away politely at those weekend dinner parties when the other men eventually put their arms around the waist of their wives and girlfriends, leaning over now and again to kiss their shoulders or necks. It was not sending away for classical music CDs by mail, working his way methodically through the major composers that the catalog recommended, and always sending his payments in on time. In the months before meeting Twinkle, Sanjeev had begun to realize this. You have enough money in the bank to raise 3 families, his mother reminded him when they spoke at the start of each month on the phone. You need a wife to look after and love. Now he had one, a pretty one, from a suitably high caste, who would soon have a master's degree. What was there not to love? That evening, Sanjeev poured himself a gin and tonic, drank it and most of another during one segment of the news, and then approached Twinkle, who was taking a bubble bath, for she announced that her limbs ached from raking the lawn, something she had never done before. He didn't knock. She had applied a bright blue mask to her face, was smoking and sipping some bourbon with ice, and leafing through a fat paperback book whose pages had buckled and turned gray from the water. He glanced at the cover. The only thing written on it was the word Sonnets in dark red letters. He took a breath, and then he informed her very calmly that after finishing his drink, he was going to put on his shoes and go outside and remove the Virgin from the front lawn. "Where are you going to put it?" she asked him dreamily, her eyes closed. One of her legs emerged, unfolding gracefully, from the layer of suds. She flexed and pointed her toes. "For now, I'm going to put it in the garage. Then tomorrow morning, on my way to work, I am going to take it to the dump." "Don't you dare!" She stood up, letting the book fall into the water, bubbles dripping down her thighs. "I hate you," she informed him, her eyes narrowing at the word hate. She reached for the bathrobe, tied it tightly about her waist, and padded down the winding staircase, leaving sloppy wet footprints along the parquet floor. When she reached the foyer, Sanjeev said, "Are you planning on leaving the house that way?" He felt a throbbing in his temples, and his voice revealed an unfamiliar snarl when he spoke. "Who cares? Who cares what way I leave this house?" "Where are you planning on going at this hour?" "You can't throw away that statue. I won't let you." Her mask, now dry, had assumed an ashen quality, and water from her hair dripped onto the caked contours of her face. "Yes, I can. I will." "No," Twinkle said, her voice suddenly small. "This is our house. We own it together. The statue is a part of our property." She had begun to shiver. A small pool of bathwater had collected around her ankles. He went to shut a window, fearing that she would catch cold. Then he noticed that some of the water dripping down her hard blue face was tears. "Oh God, Twinkle, please. I didn't mean it." He had never seen her cry before, had never seen such sadness in her eyes. She didn't turn away or try to stop the tears. Instead, she looked strangely at peace. For a moment she closed her lids, pale and unprotected compared to the blue that caked the rest of her face. Sanjeev felt ill, as if he had eaten either too much or too little. She went to him, placing her damp toweled arms about his neck, sobbing into his chest, soaking his shirt. The mask flaked onto his shoulders. In the end, they settled on a compromise. The statue would be placed in a recess at the side of the house, so that it wasn't obvious to passerby, but was still clearly visible to all who came. The menu for the party was fairly simple. There would be a case of champagne, and samosas from an Indian restaurant in Hartford, and big trays of rice with chicken and almonds and orange peels, which Sanjeev had spent the greater part of the morning and afternoon preparing. He had never entertained on such a large scale before, and, worried that there would not be enough to drink, ran out at one point to buy another case of champagne just in case. For this reason, he burned one of the rice trays and began to start it over again. Twinkle swept the floors and volunteered to pick up the samosas. She had an appointment for a manicure and a pedicure in that direction anyways. Sanjeev had planned to ask if she would consider clearing the menagerie off the mantel, if only for the party, but she left while he was in the shower. She was gone for a good 3 hours, and so it was Sanjeev who did the rest of the cleaning. By 5:30, the entire house sparkled, with scented candles that Twinkle had picked up in Hartford illuminating the items on the mantel, and slender stalks of burning incense planted into the soil of potted plants. Each time he paused the mantel, he winced, dreading the raised eyebrows of his guest as they viewed the flickering ceramic saints, the salt and pepper shakers designed to resemble Mary and Joseph. Still, they would be impressed, he hoped, by the lovely bay windows, the shining parquet floors, the impressive winding staircase, the wooden wainscoting, as they sipped champagne and dipped samosas in chutney. Douglas, one of the new consultants at the firm, and his girlfriend Nora were the first to arrive. Both were tall and blonde, wearing matching wire-rimmed glasses and long black overcoats. Nora wore a black hat full of sharp thin feathers that corresponded to sharp thin angles of her face. Her left hand was joined with Douglas's. In her right hand was a bottle of cognac with a red ribbon wrapped around its neck, which she gave to Twinkle. "Great lawn, Sanjeev," Douglas remarked. "We've got to get that rake out ourselves, sweetie, and this must be my wife, Tanima. And this must be my wife, Tanima. Call me Twinkle." "What an unusual name," Nora remarked. Twinkle shrugged. "Not really. There's an actress in Bombay named Dimple Kapadia. She has a sister named Simple." Douglas and Nora raised their eyebrows simultaneously, nodding slowly, as if to let the absurdity of the name settle in. "Pleased to meet you, Twinkle. Help yourself to champagne. There's gallons." "I hope you don't mind asking," Douglas said, "but I noticed the statue outside. Are you guys Christian? I thought you were Indian." "They are Christians in India," Sanjeev replied, "but we're not." "I love your outfit," Nora told Twinkle, "and I adore your hat. Would you like the grand tour?" The bell rang again, and again and again. Within minutes, it seemed, the house had filled with bodies and conversations and unfamiliar fragrances. The women wore heels and sheer stockings, and short black dresses made of crepe and chiffon. They handed their wraps and coats to Sanjeev, who draped them carefully on hangers in the spacious coat closet. The Twinkle told people to throw their things on the ottomans in the solarium. Some of the Indian women wore their finest saris, made with gold filigree that draped in elegant pleats over their shoulders. The men wore jackets and ties with citrus-scented aftershaves. As people filtered from one room to the next, presents piled onto the long cherry wood table that ran from one end of the downstairs hall to the other. It bewildered Sanjeev that it was for him, and his house, and his wife, that they had all gone to so much care. The only other time in his life that something similar had happened was his wedding day, but somehow this was different. For these were not his family, but people who knew him only casually, and in a sense owed him nothing. Everyone congratulated him. Lester, another co-worker, predicted that Sanjeev would be promoted to vice president in 2 months maximum. People devoured the samosas, and dutifully admired the fresh painted ceilings and walls, the hanging plants, the bay windows, the silk paintings from Jaipur. But most of all, they admired Twinkle, and her brocaded salwar kameez, which was the shade of a persimmon with a low scoop in the back, and the little string of white rose petals she had coiled cleverly around her head, and the pearl choker with a sapphire at its center that adorned her throat. Over hectic jazz records, played under Twinkle's supervision, they laughed at her anecdotes and observations, forming a widening circle around her, while Sanjeev replenished the samosas that he kept warming evenly in the oven, and getting ice for people's drinks, and opening more bottles of champagne with some difficulty, and explaining for the 40th time that he wasn't Christian. It was Twinkle who led them in separate groups up and down the winding stairs, to gaze at the back lawn, to peer down the cellar steps, Your friends adore the poster in my study, she mentioned to him triumphantly, placing her hand on the small of his back as they, at one point, brushed past each other. Sanjeev went to the kitchen, which was empty, and ate a piece of chicken out of the tray on the counter with his fingers because he thought no one was looking. He ate a second piece, then washed it down with a gulp of gin straight from the bottle. Great house. Great rice. Sunil, an anesthesiologist, walked in, spooning food from his paper plate into his mouth. Do you have any more champagne? Your wife's wow, added Prabal, following behind. He was an unmarried professor of physics at Yale. For a moment Sanjeev stared at him blankly, then blushed. Once at a dinner party, Prabal had pronounced that Sophia Loren was wow, as was Audrey Hepburn. Does she have a sister? Sunil picked a raisin out of the rice tray. Is her last name Little Star? The two men laughed and started eating more rice from the tray, plowing through it with their plastic spoons. Sanjeev went down to the cellar for more liquor. For a few minutes he paused on the steps, in the damp, cool silence, hugging the second crate of champagne to his chest as the party drifted above the rafters. Then he set the reinforcements on the dining table. Yes, everything. We found them all in the house, in the most unusual places, he heard Twinkle saying in the living room. In fact, we keep finding them. No! Yes! Every day is like a treasure hunt. It's too good. God only knows what else we'll find. No pun intended. That was what started it. As if by some unspoken pact, the whole party joined forces and began combing through each of the rooms, opening closets on their own, peering under chairs and cushions, feeling behind curtains, removing books from bookcases. Groups scampered, giggling and swaying, up and down the winding staircase. We've never explored the attic, Twinkle announced suddenly, and so everybody followed. How do we get up there? There's a ladder in the hallway, somewhere in the building. Warily, Sanjeev followed at the back of the crowd, to point out the location of the ladder, but Twinkle had already found it on her own. Eureka! She hollered. Douglas pulled the chain that released the steps. His face was flushed, and he was wearing Nora's feather hat on his head. One by one the guests disappeared, men helping women as they placed their strappy high heels on the narrow slats of the ladder, the Indian women wrapping the free ends of their expensive saris into their waistbands, the men following behind, all quickly disappearing, until Sanjeev alone remained at the top of the winding staircase. Footsteps thundered over his head. He had no desire to join them. He wondered if the ceiling would collapse, imagined, for a split second, the sight of all the tumbling, drunk, perfumed bodies crashing, tangled, around him. He heard a shriek, and then rising, spreading waves of laughter in discordant tones. Something fell. Something else shattered. He could hear them babbling about a truck. They seemed to be struggling to get it open, banging feverishly on its surface. He thought perhaps Twinkle would call for his assistance, but he was not summoned. He looked about the hallway and the landing below, at the champagne glasses and half-eaten samosas and napkins smeared with lipstick abandoned in every corner, on every available surface. Then he noticed that Twinkle, in her haste, had discarded her shoes altogether, for they lay by the foot of the ladder. Black patent leather mules with heels like golf tees, open toes, and slightly soiled silk labels on the instep where her soles had rested. He placed them in the doorway of the master bedroom so that no one would trip when they descended. He heard something creaking open slowly. The strident voices had subsided to an even murmur. It occurred to Sanjeev that he had the house all to himself. The music had ended, and he could hear, if he concentrated, the hum of the refrigerator, and the rustle of the leaves on the trees outside, and the tapping of their branches against the window panes. With one flick of his hand, he could snap the ladder back on its spring into the ceiling, and they would have no way of getting down unless he were to pull the chain and let them. He thought of all the things he could do, undisturbed. He could sweep Twinkle's menagerie into a garbage bag and get in the car and drive it all to the dump, and tear down the poster of Weeping Jesus, and take a hammer to the Virgin Mary while he was at it. Then he would return to the empty house. He could easily clear up the cups and plates in an hour's time, and pour himself a gin and tonic, and eat a plate of warmed rice and listen to his new box CD while reading the liner notes so as to understand it properly. He nudged the ladder slightly, but it was sturdily planted against the floor. Budging it would require some effort. "My God, I need a cigarette!" Twinkle exclaimed from above. Sanjeev felt knots forming at the back of his neck. He felt dizzy. He needed to lie down. He walked toward the bedroom, but stopped short when he saw Twinkle's shoes facing in the doorway. He thought of her slipping them on her feet, but instead of feeling irritated, as he had ever since they'd moved into the house together, he felt a pang of anticipation at the thought of her rushing unsteadily down the winding staircase in them, scratching the floor a bit in her path. The pang intensified as he thought of her rushing to the bathroom to brighten her lipstick, and eventually rushing to get people their coats, and finally rushing to the cherrywood table when the last guest had left, to begin opening their housewarming presents. It was the same pang he used to feel before they were married, when he would hang up the phone after one of their conversations, or when he would drive back from the airport, wondering which ascending plane in the sky was hers. "Sanj, you won't believe this." She emerged with her back to him, her hands over her head, the tops of her bare shoulder blades perspiring, supporting something still hidden from view. "You got it, Twinkle?" someone asked. "Yes, you can go." Now he saw that her hands were wrapped around it, a solid, silver bust of Christ, the head easily 3 times the size of his own. It had a patrician bump on its nose, magnificent curly hair that rested atop a pronounced collarbone, and a broad forehead that reflected in miniature the walls and doors and lampshades around them. Its expression was confident, as if assured of its devotees, the unyielding lips sensuous and full. It was also sporting Norga's feather hat. As Twinkle descended, Sanjeev put his hands around her waist to balance her, and he relieved her of the bust when she had reached the ground. It weighed a good 30 pounds. The others began lowering themselves slowly, exhausted from the hunt. Some trickled downstairs in search of a fresh drink. She took a breath, raised her eyebrows, crossed her fingers. "Would you mind terribly if we displayed him on the mantel? Just for the night? I know you hate it." He did hate it. He hated its immensity, and its flawless, polished surface, and its undeniable value. He hated that it was in his house, and that he owned it. Unlike the other things they'd found, this contained dignity, solemnity, beauty even. But to his surprise, these qualities made him hate it all the more. Most of all, he hated it because he knew that Twinkle loved it. "I'll keep it in my study from tomorrow," Twinkle added. "I promise." She would never put it in her study, he knew. For the rest of their days together, she would keep it in the center of the mantel, flanked on either side by the rest of the menagerie. Each time they had guests, Twinkle would explain how she had found it, and they would admire her as they listened. He gazed at the crushed rose petals in her hair, at the pearl and sapphire choker at her throat, at the sparkly crimson polish on her toes. He decided these were among the things that made Prabal think she was wow. His head ached from gin, and his arms ached from the weight of the statue. He said, "I put your shoes in the bedroom." "Thanks," but my feet are killing me. Twinkle gave his elbow a little squeeze and headed for the living room. Sanjeev pressed the massive silver face to his ribs, careful not to let the feather hat slip, and followed her. End of This Blessed House by Jhumpa Lahiri. This has been an audio recording by me, Jordan Barclay, just doing this because I want to. If you enjoyed the production of this audiobook, please give it a like. I'd appreciate it. If you have any requests on what I should read next, comment below and I'll see if I can get to it as soon as possible. And if you want to be stayed updated on these audio recordings, hit the subscribe button and I'll see if I can get to many as soon as possible. Alright guys, this has been fun. I'm out. Have a good day. Bye.